across Bolivia after the massacre of anti-coup protesters. The Haitian opposition calls for President Wise's resignation. And the president of Catalonia appears in court for disobedience. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, and this is From the South. We begin in Bolivia, where roadblocks have been set up in Cochabamba as the department reels from the killing of 9 people during repression of demonstrations in the town of Sacaba. 3 marches are set to enter the city of Cochabamba today. They are calling for justice and the resignation of Jeanine Áñez and the de facto government. Massive demonstrations have been growing across Bolivia since President Evo Morales was deposed in a right-wing coup d'etat a week ago. The administration in control has since given police and the military a carte blanche to kill in the name of public order. So far, at least 24 people have died in repression of protests. Let's take a deeper look at the massacre on Friday.
President, we want justice for... We want the resignation of the self-proclaimed president. We want justice for all our fallen colleagues. These have been murders. The police and the military are killing us as if we were animals. We want justice.
Friday night, state repression reached new levels when security forces opened fire on unarmed protesters who were mobilizing against the coup that ousted President Evo Morales.
4 people died in Bielma Hospital, and 8 have died in Sacaba. This is a highly irregular situation.
On his Twitter account, President Morales condemned these attacks against the Bolivian people and called on the armed forces to stop the violence. At the same time, the self-proclaimed president, Jeanine Áñez, rejected the accusations of social repression, supporting the actions of the armed forces by framing them as a normal part of the political crisis the country is living under.
We're doing everything in coordination and in unity with our brothers in the police. That is what the current circumstances call for.
A vigil was held on Cerro's Day for the victims of the massacre, as family and friends said their last goodbyes. During the event, the community demanded justice for the murderers. Throughout the rest of the weekend, the mobilizations continued, as thousands took to the streets to demand an end to repression and impunity. They say they will continue to protest until democracy is restored.
Now, our correspondent in Bolivia's administrative capital, La Paz, Freddy Morales, brings us up to speed on the latest developments.
Another tense day is expected here in La Paz and across the country. Yesterday, community councils held over the weekend in the city of El Alto decided to block food entering La Paz and prevent the circulation of vehicles to demand the resignation of Senator Jeanine Áñez, who is currently in the government palace. Additionally, the organizations in the city of El Alto across its 14 districts have determined to adopt measures to pressure those occupying the government. The de facto authorities are responding by saying that they don't need to provide answers to those in El Alto, that they don't have any demands. That's the principal response. They say they are calling on for talks with the city of El Alto and La Paz, but that they are worried there are no demands. They aren't asking for anything. However, the social movements say that they are calling for the resignation of the government that installed itself a week ago.
Moving on to Chile, the uprising against the neoliberal system has now been continuing for 1 month. There has been more repression against smaller protests this Monday morning, including one by school students in the Ñuñoa neighborhood of Santiago. A bigger protest has been called for the afternoon. Last week's agreement in Parliament for a referendum on a new constitution has not stopped the demonstrations, nor has President Piñera's first criticism of police violence on Sunday.
Unfortunately, and despite the firm commitment and all the precautions we take, not only the government, but also our armed forces, to protect the human rights of all, in some cases, the protocols were not respected. There was excessive use of force, abuses or crimes were committed, and the rights of all were not respected.
Our correspondent Leonel Retamal reports from Santiago.
It is now 1 month since the uprising began here in Chile against the injustices of the economic system and in favor of a constituent assembly to rewrite the Pinochet-era constitution. We're outside one of the metro stations where the protests began against an increase in the subway fares. Secondary school students began to demonstrate against the fare rise, and that had a domino effect in the rest of the population who joined the protests when they saw the repression used against the students. Among the many demands are fairer access to healthcare, education, housing and pensions, the most urgent daily needs of the Chilean people. But the underlying theme here is that the existing constitution from 1980 puts a lot of limits on addressing issues like these. So we see many huge demonstrations with millions taking to the streets. The government has announced a number of measures, but these have not satisfied most of the demonstrators. Last week there was an agreement in Parliament to hold a plebiscite as a step towards drawing up a new constitution. But this also failed to satisfy many people, and the calls for demonstrations have continued. President Piñera spoke on Sunday again, but this has not had any effect on the protesters either. A number of cases are before the courts this Monday over human rights abuses during the last month, and another big protest is being called in the afternoon to mark the 1 month of the revolt.
Many protesters say the proposed constitutional referendum does not guarantee enough space for social movements, and they are worried that the need for a two-thirds majority could block serious change. More in this report.
1 month after a social explosion rocked Chile, Congress tried to put an end to the conflict with an agreement to draft a new constitution. But people rejected the proposal, as social organizations and labor unions say people must continue to take the streets.
There are debates that still need to be had. Social parity, the participation of indigenous communities, this process is not yet at its end.
We call on people to continue mobilizing, to continue taking the streets. On Monday the 18th, we must go out to fill public squares throughout the country to tell them that although they have the kitchen, we have the pots and the pans. And this does not end until the social movements say so.
It all began as a protest against the rise of public transport fares, but repression against high school students was the catalyst for a host of social demands to explode, quickly escalating into the social outburst that seeks to change the economic model at its root.
It was a political mistake not to realize the social explosion that was coming when we were clear about it. We had calls for social protests on September 5th, saying that we did not want more neoliberal system anymore, that we did not want our lives to worsen. But even so, the state did not take into account our opinion.
The balance in terms of human rights during this month has been negative. 26,000 people arrested, 2,381 wounded, 23 people dead, and 217 who have lost an eye, mainly as a result of the repressive actions of the police.
The eye situation is very serious, something not seen anywhere else in the world. In 1 month, we have more than 200 people with severe eye damage, and the other thing that we have not seen are the mental health problems that are a result of this situation.
All government measures have been rejected by the streets: decreasing public transport fares, a broader social agenda, changes to the pension system, and recently a parliamentary agreement for a plebiscite for a new constitution.
Health, education, housing, pensions, all of these are things that concern the people on the streets. And we are seeing the government's inability to lead in the face of a social crisis. Every time the president has intervened, he has worsened the crisis.
The people on the street feel they are the protagonists of their own future. They have proven to have strength and power, and they don't want to return to the Chile that was before October 18.
Still to come, tragedy at a Tobago tourist destination. We'll bring you up to date after the break.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursday, only on LS1.
Welcome back. The Ecuadorian National Assembly has shelved a proposed economic reform bill that was being pushed by the government of Lenin Moreno. Many call this a meaningful victory for the people, as 70 lawmakers voted in favor of shelving a bill that had received strong criticisms from social sectors. It pushed for neoliberal measures that comply with the requirements of the International Monetary Fund. It was rejected 1 month after massive popular protests brought down a similar law.
Denial was the way out, because otherwise they were going to give us poison sweets through 2 or 3 things that were positive in this project. They wanted to make it maliciously, go through the Ministry of Law.
Let's go live to our correspondent here in Quito, Denise Herrera. Denise, can you explain what was in this bill and why the Assembly rejected it?
Hello, good morning. Yes, indeed, the Ecuador National Assembly decided with 70 affirmative votes to reject a package of monetary reforms presented by President Lenin Moreno. We should remember that it's important to remember that these reforms were suggested by Moreno after an agreement signed between Ecuador and the International Monetary Fund for $4.2 billion. In this context, also, the government bill aimed to improve tax collection by increasing some taxes and establishing a special contribution for companies with annual revenues of more than $1 million. In this context, also, it's important to remember that several social organizations of workers, citizens, and the indigenous movement rejected these economical proposals because they said that these economic measures are affecting directly all Ecuadorian citizens. So they decided to reject these economic measures. In this context, also, President Lenin Moreno just said that he will send a new economic reform in the coming hours. So we will see what is Moreno expecting with these economic reforms? Meanwhile, several social organizations and indigenous movements said that they will discuss these economic measures, and they are rejecting this economic measure, and they are also continue asking to President Lenin Moreno to include all the different sectors in this economic discussion.
Now, Denise, last month's protest forced the government to withdraw its plan to remove fuel subsidies. That's Decree 883. Now the Assembly has rejected this economy bill. Will the government be able to maintain its agreement with the IMF?
Yes, indeed. This is the reason why the National Assembly rejected this economic proposal. They say they are affecting all Ecuadorian citizens, but the government wants to maintain this economic measure because they signed an agreement with the IMF, so they have to continue this economic discussion with all Ecuadorian all the Ecuadorian and all the citizens. So it's a very difficult moment for all Ecuadorian because the government insists to sign this agreement with the International Monetary Fund. Meanwhile, several social organizations are rejected this economic proposal.
Thank you so much, Denise, for providing us with this update and keeping us up to date with the developments regarding this deal between Ecuador and the International Monetary Fund. Moving on to news from the Caribbean. Haitian President Jovenel Moïse says the country needs international support to tackle an unfolding humanitarian crisis following 2 months of anti-government protests. Fuel shortages in August sparked protests that have turned into a campaign against Moïse, accusing him of embezzling millions in public funds. The protests have been met with violent police repression, and live ammunition has been used frequently on protesters.
We are working to see how to bring everyone together for a sustainable solution to the crisis, and that must go through a political agreement. It is necessary to have an agreement because we need a consensus, and from then we will have a government of national union.
Well, reacting to President Moise's statement, Haitian opposition leader Andre Michel said the crisis can only be resolved with his resignation.
To the crisis is through the resignation of President Jovenel Moïse. There is no possibility of sharing anything with Jovenel Moïse. He has to resign to reach a transition that is different from what we had known before. That also allows us to address several cases of corruption, such as a Petrocaribe, to the National Conference. We will sit together to create basis of a new society in the interest of Haitian society.
In some devastating news, an outing to Argyle waterfalls in Trinidad's sister Isle Tobago turned into tragedy after 8 people were swept away by a surge of water, leaving 2 dead. The incident occurred around 3 p.m. on Sunday following heavy rainfall in the forest. A 15-year-old girl got into difficulty while celebrating her birthday, and a 19-year-old boy tried to save her, but they both drowned. Fire officials tried to resuscitate the 2 after retrieving their bodies, but were unsuccessful.
One of the deceased was celebrating her birthday today. Her name is Carissa Thompson. She's a 15-year-old. And along with other family members, they made their way up to the waterfall for a picnic. While they were there, the water suddenly changed and there was a gush of water coming down the waterfall, which toppled firstly Carissa over, and an attempt was made by Chrislan to save her. And he too became a victim of the circumstance.
Meanwhile, residents in parts of South Trinidad suffered through yet another day of heavy showers matched by bouts of flash flooding. Parts of the Solomon Hochoy Highway near Claxton Bay were affected by floodwaters impeding traffic and accessibility. Water levels inundated some residents' homes, damaging property, including vehicles. There are no reports of loss of life. Coming up, China is giving the UK a stern tongue lashing. Find out why after the break. Stick around.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Earth. Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The Catalan president, Quim Torra, has appeared in court for disobedience. The Spanish prosecutor's office and far-right Vox party brought President Torra to trial over a banner and yellow ribbon supporting the Catalan political and civic leaders in prison or exile following the region's 2017 referendum on independence. The accusers say that the paraphernalia was of a political partisan character. President Torra didn't take the paraphernalia down when first asked by the Spanish Electoral Council. When asked whether he disobeyed, he said, of course, because the order was illegal.
I didn't obey. But let's say it in another way. It was impossible to obey an illegal order. Everyone in this room knows that the order was illegal, made by a body that didn't have the jurisdiction to make it. What I did was comply with my duty as president, which is to defend the rights and freedom of this country's citizens, which in this country have been so hard to win. We've done it centimetre by centimetre, and I will never permit that they are broken and stamped on.
China's ambassador to the United Kingdom, Liu Xiaoming, has warned the United Kingdom to stop meddling in his country's affairs. At a media briefing in London, Xiaoming accused the UK and other Western nations of fanning the violent protests in Hong Kong.
We urge these forces to immediately stop any form of interference in Hong Kong affairs, China's internal affairs, and immediately stop condoning violent offences. Otherwise, they will lift the stone only to drop it on their own feet. I think when the British government criticized Hong Kong police, criticized Hong Kong government in handling the situation, they are interfering into China's internal affairs. And they look like they are balanced, but as a matter of fact, they are taking sides.
In Lebanon, people poured into the streets to mark a month of anti-government protests. Hundreds of thousands gathered to demand the formation of an independent, technocratic government in order to tackle the country's spiraling financial crisis and improve access to basic services such as electricity and water.
We're staying here. We don't know for how long. Maybe 1 or 2 months, or 1 or 2 years. Maybe it will take 10 years to get the state that we are dreaming of. But everything starts with one step, and we took it.
When people's pockets are empty, they won't ask about anyone anymore. They won't care about any leader or any local party. That's it. The people's pockets are empty, so they don't care anymore.
In other news, Iran has accused the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo of undermining its sovereignty by encouraging citizens to overthrow the constitutionally elected government. Iran's parliament leader said Pompeo's behavior is an act of shameless and foolish opportunism. Pompeo took to Twitter on Saturday to express his support for the violent protests that rocked the Persian country over the weekend.
When the impudent U.S. foreign minister openly supported setting fire on people's properties, shamelessly and with foolish opportunism calling this his support for the people of Iran, he showed his trumped-up and hypocritical behavior towards the nation of Iran, and that the U.S. purpose about Iran is nothing but messing up the security of the country and setting the nation's interests on fire.
Israeli police have fired tear gas at protesters in Bethlehem in support of a Palestinian journalist who had been injured by a rubber bullet. Journalists and activists were marching in support of Muta Armaneh, who was hit in his left eye by a rubber bullet shot by Israeli soldiers while covering a story in the southern West Bank. Armaneh is still waiting for confirmation on whether he has lost all sight in his left eye.
We came to show solidarity with our colleague Muat, whose eye was injured a few days ago in Sarf village. We discovered that all the eyes of journalists are targeted by Israeli soldiers. What happened today is a direct targeting by the occupation forces of Palestinian photo and video journalists. The attack on us today is a systematic program towards Palestinian photographers and cameramen for no reason. This is a peaceful march of solidarity with our colleague Muat.
We move on to African news now, where supporters of ousted Sudanese leader Omar al-Bashir held a protest to oppose a move by the country's new authorities to hand him over to the International Criminal Court, or ICC. The protesters rejected the proposed use of foreign tribunals to handle Sudanese domestic matters. The ICC has accused al-Bashir of having committed war crimes, a charge which he has denied.
Therefore, we ask government officials to restore confidence in the Sudanese judiciary and not to submit the president to the International Criminal Court.
The union behind a strike at South African Airways has threatened to shut down the whole aviation sector after talks with the state-run carrier ended without a deal. South African Airways was forced to cancel hundreds of flights on Friday and Saturday, saying the crippling strike action had cost it $3.4 million a day. Workers are demanding an 8% pay rise and want the airline to drop plans to cut more than 900 jobs. And we end in Senegal, where the 6th edition of the Dakar International Forum on Peace and Security is underway. The two-day-long conference is being attended by several African and European heads of state, including host Macky Sall and French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe. It comes at a time when the West African region is dealing with a sharp increase in armed attacks in the Sahel region. The 2011 overthrow of former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi by NATO-backed rebels resulted in increased lawlessness in the region. Earlier, the Prime Minister of France presented the historic 19th century sword of El Hadj Oumar Tall to Senegalese President Macky Sall. Oumar Tall was a Senegalese political leader and military commander who was defeated by the French in 1893. During the presentation of the sword, President Macky Sall said the object is mythical, a symbol of the struggle against French colonization.
By restoring the sword of El Hadj Oumar Tall, an outstanding intellectual mystic, holyman and resistant, France celebrates at the same time at its own greatness, the honor and dignity of a fighter, whose refusal to submit symbolizes our common attachment, has a shared value, freedom.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on StarSat Channel 461 in South Africa and Channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you so much for watching.